with Mike McVay, who was the host of the panel at the Worldwide Radio Conference recently about coaching the coaches. And Mike and I talked about how we could have probably talked the rest of the day and part of the next day about all the topics that we got into and didn't have time for. So I appreciate you joining me to investigate some of these topics in a little bit more depth, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. I'm honored to be a part of this, Tracy. Appreciate it very much.
So let's start at the top. How important is it that programmers and managers actually spend time and work with developing talent?
I mean, talent are exceptionally important to radio today. Talent have always been important to radio, but today, with the fact that we have streaming services, we're under attack from podcasts. If you're a music machine, then you're immediately saying, I'm not going to be number one. And by the way, that's strategy. I mean, there have been times when I've been involved with radio stations that said, we don't think we can beat the guys across the street, so we're going to put our money into other things we do. Fine. But I think talent are really important because a guy like me can come into your town, copy your music, give away more money than you, buy more TV commercials and billboards than you, and beat you unless you have air talent that have connected with an audience and that are creating day-to-day tune-in. So very important.
I always called it bulletproofing your radio station, where all those things that you just said are true. Someone can come in and play more music and better music and cut the commercial load, and they can out-program any radio station. Any programmer can out-program any other radio station in a direct attack, but they can't overcome that connection that personalities make with personalities. And I always saw it at my stations as it gave us a much higher floor and an unlimited ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I know that you've talked about and you've had talent like Jeff and Jer who have married the market, and I mean, that does bulletproof you and it does make your radio station so much stronger. It obviously also sets up a vulnerability. When you lose those talent, you lose something significant. But I'd rather have them for a while than not have them at all.
Yeah, and there's some stations that fear that what's going to happen if these personalities leave and they don't make the big moves and they just kind of limp along as that music machine, which, as you said, is a valid strategy in some cases. But I think that it becomes a more vulnerable position with the more competition that comes in.
Yeah, totally. I agree 100%.
So where do things go wrong? What are some of the mistakes that you see? I mean, with all of your experience and the roles that you've played, you've been in every format, virtually every market, both nationally and internationally, working with programmers, managers, and talent of all ranges of experience and expertise. Is there anything that's common
I was going to say, I've got the gray hair to prove it. I'll tell you what Tracy, what I think the biggest mistake is programmers who don't coach their talent, who don't spend any time with them. And I'm sure you run into it. I know I do, that I'll sit with the talent and be talking to them and coaching them. And some in major markets who will say, I've never been coached. No one's ever gone over an air check with me, which is a shame. The other mistakes I think they make are, first off, making it about their ego versus the talent. I'm the boss. You will do it my way. That's a problem. You've got to make your talent a priority. If you're going to meet with them, put your phone on silent. Shut your door. Don't be checking email while you're talking to a talent. Value their time and make them a priority. And I also think that defining the parameters of what you want a talent to do, defining them with negatives is terrible. Mm-hmm. Because it gets to a point where a talent who's getting beat up all the time for trying something will say, it's better for me to do nothing and not get in trouble than try something and get in trouble. And those are some of the most common mistakes that I see uniformly.
That brings up an interesting point of the difference between being a manager and being a coach. And they're two different skills, aren't they?
Very much so. I mean, it's push versus pull. A manager is pushing you and saying, you need to do this. A coach is pulling someone. A coach is focused on making that talent's performance better. If you look at all of the sports, and I think it's a comparison that's really valid, the very best athletes are often the most coachable. And one of the direct experience analogies I've had is that a couple times in my career, I've been hired to coach play by play and color analysts for baseball and for football. And so what I found is that the former football player who is the color analyst is taking notes, they're asking me questions, they're trying to accomplish it. The person who was the disc jockey, who is just doing play by play, tends to cross their arms and be less open to advice. And so athletes have been coached since they could walk. Coaching is just better. It's about making the person's performance better. It's about helping them win because you win. Managing is, the analogy is a story long ago, early in my career. I lived in a little apartment along the banks of the Ohio River in Wheeling, West Virginia. And one day on a Saturday when it was sunny, I walked down the banks and was hanging out, just watching the boats go by. And when I got to the riverbank, there was a tugboat with about 4 barges laid out in front of it. And the tugboat captain was just kind of on the dock and he saw me, and I was probably drinking a beer, doing something else you're not supposed to do in public in those days. And he yelled at me and said, "You got another one of those?" And I walked down and handed it to him and started talking about what his job was. And I said, "So how do you chain the barges together?" And he said, "Well, they're not chained. I just line them up and I push them and hope they go where I want." And that's like managing, right? You line
Mm-hmm.
people up and you push them and you hope they go where you want. That's a push. The pull of a coach is encouraging, guiding, explaining, trying things, figuring out what works better than other things and doing more of that.
And that takes time. And time is a commodity that a lot of programmers don't have today with all of the hats that they wear. In fact, that's the number one thing that I find in the programmers that I work with in coaching talent, that they say, we just don't have time. How do they find time, or how do they make time in this environment?
With too many program directors, and I mean no offense when I say this, although it will sound offensive, too many are kings and queens of programming. And what you want to be is a content creator and a coach. And so the very best programmers I've worked with are really organized. I mean, they just understand, what needs to be done, how to organize it to get it done, how to encourage and coach other people to assist them in getting it done. And if you're not very well organized, then it's always going to be a problem and a challenge. And so if you know what you need to do, you can do it. Those people who've ever worked with me know that I am obsessive compulsive, literally, figuratively, diagnosed, and therefore I am Monday we do these things, Tuesday these things, Wednesday these things, Thursday these things, Friday these things. And on my phone and on my computer, I have files for each day and one that says future. And so I think the only way you can get through everything you have to do today is by being exceptionally organized and also being prepared for your plans to be blown up by 10 a.m.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And preparation is one of the most important things that I believe that talent coaches, programmers, managers must invest to be effective coaches with personalities. You can't just walk into a meeting and say, well, what are we going to talk about today? Or come in and say, well, let's pull an air check and go over it. I tell my programmers that you need to invest as much time in preparing to coach the talent as you expect the talent to invest in preparing to perform their show.
Absolutely. And by the way, you need to listen to the show.
Mm-hmm. And be
I
a
mean, you
fan.
know, the technology exists today, be it products that you yourself have been involved in creating or other skimmer products to capture audio and be able to sit down and listen to it. And if you're not going to sit down and listen to it live, which is very difficult, surely you can block out an hour and listen to a 4 hour radio program in that 1 hour. I know, like you, I listen every day to several shows because I have notes and consulting that I have to do with those shows. And so I think you have to be disciplined to do that and make a religious like commitment to it.
Mike, you talked about the difference between coaching the play-by-play DJs that were learning to do play-by-play and the players who were used to being coaches. And I have a story about that too. I worked with a personality that was absolutely delightful, highly talented, and came from television. And we got into critique sessions, and everybody in the building was afraid of her. They thought, well, here's this diva. She's strong-willed, and she's got this big attitude. And they were afraid to say anything to her. And I sat down with her and went over some pros and cons, and said, you know, how can we improve your performance? How can we bring out the difference? How can we bring out these character traits in you? And how can I help you perform better? And we sat there for 2 hours. And at the end, she was saying, give me more, tell me more, tell me more. And I said, why are you so coachable? Nobody thinks you're coachable. And she said, I just need a director to tell me what to do with my talent. She said, in television, they always tell me what to do. Point me in a direction, tell me what you want, I'll go do it for you. And I think there's a lot of personalities in radio, not DJs necessarily, but personalities who are exactly the same way. If the programmers who are working with them and the coaches that are working with them will approach it the right way.
Yeah, I agree totally. And, you know, again, one of the commonalities of great talent are that they want to succeed. You know, they really want to win. So you need to share with them why you want them to do what you want them to do and connect the dots to show that there is an accomplishment that is winning if they do these things.
Is it hard for a program director who was a strong personality or a good personality to become a good coach?
You know, you always hear that the very best players are not good coaches, and that's probably true to a certain extent. I know in my case, I mean, I was a morning man in a couple different markets while being a program director, but I shifted to the PD job just because it was about the money for me. I mean, I could see that I was not going to be a dominant $1 million a year morning personality. And so I made that shift. I think that really great talent, you know, those names that we see in the trades, those names that are syndicated, those names that are dominant, I think they're very focused on themselves and their performance. And so it makes it sometimes more difficult for them to be a coach because they haven't had a global view. And I'll give you another sports analogy. If you look over my shoulder, you can see my Pittsburgh Steelers Santa Claus hat up there. I'm from the Pittsburgh area as a kid. I grew up a Steelers fan. Bill Cowher, who was one of the coaches that won a Super Bowl with the Steelers, is highly regarded as a coach and now an analyst on CBS Sports. But Cowher at one point was on special teams for the Cleveland Browns. A guy that I had come across during my time here in Cleveland, near where I live, is a former center for the Browns named Mike McVay. I was having a conversation with him after he retired once, and he said, we always knew Cowher was going to become a coach because he wasn't a great player, but he sat and took notes in every meeting. And he said, while the rest of us were laughing and throwing plastic water bottles at each other, this guy was taking notes. And I think that's the difference. A player is really focused on themselves. A coach is focused more globally.
And that's a big difference in your orientation. That's why Larry Bird was never a great coach in the NBA. Great player, couldn't coach, went into the front office and succeeded.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right.
So if I'm a program director, if I'm a young program director, or even an experienced program director that has never really been a good talent coach, how do I get some of the skills that I need to work with talent and to have confidence in working with talent to bring out the best in them?
I think education is a big part of it. I mean, read everything you can, read all the trades you can, focus on learning as much as you can, listen to every radio station you can. If you go to Facebook, there's so many different groups of, people that love jingles, to people that love morning shows, to people that love radio stations, and look at those stations that are successful and figure out what they're doing, and look at those morning shows that are successful and listen to what they're doing and try to understand how that makes them successful in their market. Um, the more you can read, the more you can work, the better it's going to be. I am continually watching YouTube for TED Talks and things like that. One of the best books I ever came across in regard to managing talent is called The 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard. You can read that book in a 2 hour airplane ride. And those things that you get and read should help you become better. But the other part of it is trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be too big to say, don't be bigger than a talent, and don't be too big to be unable to admit you've made a mistake. I stood up at a morning show boot camp a few years ago while I was still at Cumulus, and someone was attacking some new avant garde programming we were trying. And I said to them, I've come to these conferences for years. Everybody yells, when are we going to try something new? We're trying something new. It may fail, but if it's successful, you will all do it because we're a business of lemmings. And so don't be afraid to try things, but learn from them.
Yeah, that's great advice. Mike, I'm sure in your travels and in your consulting and when you were head of Cumulus, you saw a lot of managers and programmers at your stations who came to you with or come to you with issues that they have with their talent. And it's based on their impressions of the talent off the air that they're projecting on the air. It's a condition known as familiarity bias, that we let our impressions and whether we like someone or don't like someone affect how we evaluate their performance. How can programmers be objective and really step back and evaluate what they're hearing and what and stay positive toward a talent that they don't like or toward behavior that they don't like, or vice versa, someone that they really like too much and all they hear is the good things that are happening and they aren't able to evaluate it objectively?
And that's a tough one because I have worked with talent and other managers that I like greatly who perhaps had inferior skills. I've worked with talent who've had superior skills that I didn't really like. But am I allowed to use profanity on this?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I can eat a lot of shit to be number one. I can eat a lot of shit to be number one.
Yeah.
And for me, it's always been about that. If I don't like a talent, that doesn't matter. And I push that aside. What I need to like is what they're doing on the air. And so that's very important. The problem I've had with managers over the year, and by the way, I've been a general manager in my career, as you have, and I often will tease managers who are too pushy, who get involved in programming, who try to make their PD the puppet. And I'll say to them, I love the creative side of the business. I've always wanted to be involved in content creation. And when I was a program director, I decided to want to become a general manager. And I'll pause and they'll go, why is that? And I'll say, because then I could program the radio station. And they usually back up a little bit at that point. But the problem are those managers that have never done it, that haven't walked a mile in the talent shoes, that think it's easy, and they, as you said, there's somebody that goes and golfs with them, and so they put up with a bad show. Or there's some great talent who doesn't kowtow to them, and they hate the person's show. And I think ultimately it comes down to what should be on a t-shirt. I can put up with a lot of shit to be number one.
Yeah. So how do you program around that talent that's worth it? Because a lot of really high profile talent, the really great ones, come with baggage.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the baggage and program and manage around the baggage that they create inside the building?
Well, when you talked earlier about learning as much as you can quickly, I was very lucky in my career to become a program director in Los Angeles at 25. And the air staff I inherited had the real Don Steele in the afternoon when I first got there. Later, we had Charlie Tuna in the morning. We put Jack Armstrong in the afternoon, Machine Gun Kelly at night. Amazing, legendary names that a lot of the younger people watching this won't have any clue who they are, but they were big, dynamic names. And I was 25. As a matter of fact, the radio station I was leaving gave me a T-shirt as my goodbye gift that said, "I must hurry to catch up with the others, for I am their leader." And it was still appropriate.
That's fantastic. That's terrific.
Appropriate. And so I always viewed that I worked for those talent. My job was to help them succeed. And so I bent over backwards to accomplish what they wanted. Charlie Tuna, who was a legendary morning man, having been on KHJ in LA, and we got for 10Q where I was, just was always slow to hit the ground. His 6 o'clock hour was never as good as the 7. Now you might sit down and say, but the bigger audiences at 7. But I felt that every time we turn on the microphone, someone's hearing us for the first time. And so ultimately we ended up having Charlie start his show at 5 a.m. And so he did 5 to 9 instead of 6 to 9. And by the way, he was good with it once I explained to him that I didn't want him to be embarrassed by someone who heard at 6 and didn't get the best him. And so that was one way to program around him. Another's an amazing talent who's become a very good friend of mine over all the years, John Lanigan. John Lanigan was number 1 in Cleveland for years and years until the day he retired. And John did mornings on WMJI in Cleveland. We were doing one of those Song of the Day contests. Everybody will know it. Listen, at 7:20 in the morning, you'll hear the Song of the Day. We'll tell you what it is, and it's worth $1,000 when it plays again later in the day. The Song of the Day was promoted on TV and billboards and direct mail as airing at 7:20. John would air the Song of the Day anytime between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. And some days forgot to air the Song of the Day because he only played 1 or 2 songs an hour. And what we ultimately did was I took a lamp, kind of like that lamp you see behind me, and on the lampshade we wrote, "Play the $1,000 Song of the Day," in a big black magic marker. We bought a cheap timer at Radio Shack. Remember Radio Shack?
Mm-hmm.
And the clock would come on at 7:18 and go off at 7:25. And we said, "John, when that light comes on, you've got to play the song. You got to announce the song." And it worked.
So it wasn't that he was uncooperative. It just wasn't a priority. And you had to give him the tools to get him to do what you wanted him to do. And he was willing to do it if it was easy, right?
Yeah. I mean, he was, as he would describe it, he was in a foxhole with bullets whizzing over his head. And I'm in there telling him to play the Song of the Day. and so, when we realized exactly what you said, I was able to get him to do it by putting the timer on a clock. And the last one I would say is Bill Bailey. Bill Bailey would never say the name of the radio station. He was another legendary talent. He'd been at WLS in Chicago. He was my morning guy at WAKY in Louisville, Kentucky, Wacky. And he would never say the name of the station during a break in a diary market, where if somebody doesn't write you down, they didn't listen.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, I had the engineer take a jingle that we had that went wacky. It was the wacky shout. And we set it up so that every time Bill turned on the microphone, the shout went. And so you'd be listening and you'd hear wacky. Good morning. It's your Duke of Louisville, Bill Bailey. And he would do his break. Now, if he shut off the mic and coughed and turned it back on, it said wacky again. But it was better than not having the name of the radio station.
That's fantastic. That's clever, creative programming. That's here's the situation I'm dealing with. What do I need to do to accomplish the goal and make it easy for the talent so it's not confrontational?
Exactly.
Because those relationships don't have to be confrontational if you're creative.
No, and I've never believed. I don't believe anybody gets out of bed in the morning and says they want to ruin my day.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, they may ruin it, but I don't think they get out of bed with that as their intention for the day.
I had a show that was on the same station when I had Jeff and Jer that was very highly talented, did an afternoon show. It's a male-female show that were very jealous of Jeff and Jer. Jeff and Jer got to do things that they didn't get to do. Jeff and Jer got to leave early. They didn't have to see as many clients. They had different privileges. They'd show up late for their show on occasion, and nothing seemed to happen to Jeff and Jer. And a lot of jealousy set in, and it created some behavior problems with other staff members because Jeff and Jarrett weren't treated the same as the other personalities were. And in reality, none of the personalities were treated the same as the other personalities. They were all treated individually, but they didn't see it that way. They only saw the other things. How can a programmer or manager deal with the other talent, the other DJs on the station, when you're putting a lot of your time and effort into your moneymaker?
I think it's about positioning it as exactly that. There's a fiduciary responsibility of this morning show generates this much revenue, and this morning show is that important to us. And the reason we have a 2-person afternoon show is because you're the heir apparent. We now have a succession plan. And I lived through that when I was at Cumulus. WABC had Don Imus in the morning. Mr. Imus wanted to work fewer days a week. He ultimately decided he was going to retire. And so we had a 6-month soiree for Don Imus. 2 of the guys on his show, Bernie and Sid, were doing 10 to noon. And there would be times, because they were even on Mr. Imus's show, that they weren't treated the same. And, I sat down with him and just said, our intention is that you're the heir apparent. No one's promising that to you, but you're the heir apparent. So you should want to work harder to get to that point. And they are the morning show on WABC today. That's who they became.
So it was identifying a goal for the other personalities and giving them something to work toward. And now they have a context in the entire strategy and the progression strategy. Very smart.
Yeah, and Tom Brady goes to Tampa Bay. I'm sure not every player on the Tampa Bay Bucks were treated as Tom Brady was this past year, but they sure enjoyed getting their Super Bowl ring.
That's right. They didn't complain then. Last question, Mike. If you had to boil this down to a few keys or a recipe for success in working with talent, or any advice that you want to give programmers in how to get the most out of inspiring talent that really does have the potential and the ability to succeed, what would you tell them?
Make your talent a priority. Be a good listener. Get to know who they are first. Often I will sit down with talent the very first time I meet with them and play the scene from Bull Durham where Kevin Costner's character and Tim Robbins' character are sitting with Susan Sarandon's character at her house. And she tells them, I'm going to pick one of the two of you. You will be my boyfriend for the entire baseball season, including the playoffs if you're lucky enough to make them. I'm also going to be the best girlfriend you ever have because while we will be monogamous to each other through the season, at the end of the season, you go your way, I go mine. We'll never see each other or communicate again. And Kevin Costner says, why do you get to pick? And she says, because that's how we do it. And he said, well, I don't believe in this. And he gets up and starts to put his coat on. And she says, oh, really? You don't believe in this? What do you believe in? And Costner's character goes into a long diatribe of, I don't believe in the designated hitter. I believe AstroTurf should be outlawed. I believe a single ground ball is the best hit. I think
Oswald acted alone.
Exactly. And concludes with, and I believe the poetry of Susan Sontag is unadulterated, boring bullshit. And she goes, oh my. Now, Kevin Costner had a scriptwriter, right? But great talent know who they are, what they stand for, what they'll do, and what they won't do. And so I think that's where you start. Who are they? And respect who they are, and then encourage them and give them all the tools you can so they can do their job.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time and kind of reversing the roles. You were the host when we did the worldwide radio conference, and you were asking the questions, but getting your insight and the benefit of your experience and all that you have to share was really valuable. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate the opportunity.